This
But
conference
kind of
will now be recorded.
again, appreciate everybody joining today. The way that we're going to kind of approach today is we've got several speakers. From a question track perspective, I am monitoring the chat on the right-hand side of the screen here. So if there are questions, please post the questions. What we're going to wind up doing is at the end, there is a Q&A. So I'm going to feed from that Q&A, also take live questions as they're popping up. If there are clarifying questions too, I am going to take a look at what's coming through. If there's clarifying questions, I will wait for a transitional period of the conversation track and address those. But all questions will be addressed regardless if it's live today or we'll take the questions. We'll actually populate some answers and responses to them, and as well as get them out to everybody that's registered today. So first and foremost, again, I appreciate everybody joining us today. We have several speakers that are going to take us through some different talk tracks and series, but I just want to kind of establish, Michelle, if you want to go to the next slide, that'd be great. The why are we here, and really why do we select this topic? I had the luxury and the pleasure to work with a lot of customers with my advisory team around specifically CMDB, and there's always this challenge when it comes to CMDB. There's quite a few challenges. One, it's getting it prioritized within your organization and getting funding and backing. Two, then it's the management and the maintenance behind it. And then three, then you've got the overall architecture and structure and what does it mean for us and how do we really manage and maintain this thing. And so, you know, in that model and that mantra, what we're going to do here and attempt to do is have a webinar series that is going to try to address a couple of different areas. We know a lot of you are in different roles in your organizations, from senior leaders through the ranks into folks that are really responsible for configuration management in general, or really just platform enthusiasts that are out there, or process owners. So what we're going to try to do is attempt to really start with a core foundation and introduce you guys to CSDM as a framework, Service Graph as a high-level strategic authority as well, and also kind of a day in the life of a configuration specialist and take you through what we consider the creep and crawl phases of CSDM as Contender Solutions. And then our goal from there is to be able to showcase what that looks like as an organization, as an individual that's going to try to drive CMDB into your organization. And really, how do we make that a priority? Like, it's not really a CMDB. What we're really doing is trying to link up to things that are really ultimately needed in your organization, key initiatives like DevOps initiatives to produce products, the ability to drive automation and standardization into the organization, and areas like that. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. And the track that we're going to take the webinar series is a couple different directions. The direction to help support individuals that are on this line to promote funding, attachment, and building of business justifications into the technical depths of how do I really structure CMDB with CSDM and what are the best practices as we kind of progress through the maturation of CSDM and CMDB. So you're going to see a couple of different tracks go out there once this foundational area gets established. We also are obviously here with Mark Bodman. We're here with Jeff Hinkle and Scott Freitas from our teams, and we'll allow them the opportunity to introduce themselves. So with that, I appreciate everybody's time, and I'll allow Mark to jump right in.
Thanks so much, Chris. So yeah, my name is Mark Bodman. I'm the Senior Product Manager here at ServiceNow for the Common Service Data Model. I'm an outbound product manager, and my colleague, Scott Lem, some of you might have met over the years. Previous to that, I was an application portfolio management product manager. So I've been a product manager here for about 3.5 years. So that's my background, is not really in operations, but more in the enterprise architecture, strategic planning, and I found myself into the CSDM area because of the need to bring together operations and planning and everything in between. So we'll get into that in a minute. So next slide, please. So what does CSDM actually stand for? So it is all around our common services. So service is really the foundation for our organization. It's in our name, and it's really the data model for that particular service orientation. And as you know, we sell a lot of different products on our platform that do share common functionality, common data. So we really needed to understand what that was, and we came out with the CSDM as a way for us to express what that is across the platform, across all products. So that's what this stands for. Next slide, please. It is a framework. I want to emphasize that it isn't something you can just purchase. It is something that is embodied in the way we think about the data model. It is something that we all share in common across the different product teams. And it's a forum. It's become a forum for us to rationalize common terminology. As you go from different jobs within IT, things mean something different. So CSDM as a framework, as a set of definitions, is now out there. We're on a version 2, and then we're evolving that also to a version 3. So I'll talk a little bit about what's coming, but we are incrementally improving CSDM as new products and new needs come about with the different product teams to come out with a common way of solving problems. Next slide. So with Knowledge 20, we announced something called Service Graph. And the reason I wanted to go to here immediately is because this is the broader vision for ServiceNow and the what I would say birth to death management of things in IT. So it's all predicated on DevOps, but of course we added a third area called service, because this is where we provide ongoing service management for everything, even if it's not being developed actively or it's from a third party. So Service Graph is sort of an umbrella concept that takes all of that data, the common data that's used across the organization, and understands how it's structured. CSDM is the framework that defines the Service Graph data model, and it is for all the digital products and services that an organization creates, right? So it's meant to kind of handle everything that a CMDB is today, but goes well beyond that to what I would say the logical, conceptual area of your organization, things that you can't discover, non-infrastructure things, and also get into things like the people, the processes, and the projects, other elements of planning that go into this end-to-end lifecycle management of your digital products and services. So you'll see a lot more coming down the pike as Service Graph gets a hold. But one of the things that I recognize that when you go into a development team or you go into an enterprise architects, they don't know what CMDBs are. That's always been relegated to an operational tool. We've extended that to a much broader set of capabilities. And as a result, we have to kind of transcend the notion of what a traditional CMDB is, which is what Service Graph has become for us. Next slide, please. Excellent. So those three areas, DevOps and services, we have products, of course, that we sell into those areas. And here's largely how they land from a color coding perspective. And on the bottom of that, we have design, manage, and consume. And those are the three domains that make up Common Service Data Model. Those three domains basically address the needs to understand IT from the design point of view when you're planning or designing something new. From a operational management point of view, it's what do you have in production now when something fails? What are the dependencies, that sort of thing? What's the infrastructure? And then last but not least is the consumption of IT. It's the service management. And we put both ITSM and CSM in that bucket because we sell two different types of products in that space. One for external, your end customers, one for your internal customers, which is traditional ITSM. So those are the three domains, and we'll get into that a little bit more in detail. But next slide, please. Why did we create this in the first place? I think a lot of folks are asking me, so this is interesting, but how did they come to this? It was a need internally across different product managers to come up with this common way of thinking. As we started to people define services in different ways, or microservices. We needed a way of defining these things and new things as they became apparent in a common way. Otherwise, we would have multiple ways of defining the same thing, and that's a bit confusing. It was really stemming from an internal need, but then it was quickly obvious that customers need the same sort of guidance. They need that same common definition across all their teams as they implement our products and as they have communication. They discuss things across their organizations. Next build, please. Then and really the last thing that I want to emphasize here is that it keeps evolving. Right now we're at a 2.0, and there has been some 2.1 discussion, but that didn't actually get published yet. So we're going right to a 3.0. So if you've seen anything labeled 2.1, that's not out there. It's going to go right to 3.0. And we're going to have a release. We're planning a release every single family release. So for Paris, you're going to see 3.0. And then for our Rome release, we're going to see a next version of CSDM. So we're trying to be ahead of products, but also make sure that anything that we change is baked into the definition, so that people that are new to these definitions or coming from another area and looking at these definitions, you can see what's coming. So it is evolving, and it keeps evolving. Next slide, please. And this is the last slide that I have. And so this is the data model and the definitions that we published, and you'll see this information in the white paper that we put out there and other materials. We have a couple training courses, things like that. And in the center, you'll see service owner. So we're looking at this from a service point of view, and these three domains are there to create and manage services once they're created. And more folks are brokering services and infrastructure from the cloud. That's our business model, obviously. And so I think this is a thing that a lot of the CIs, the traditional CIs, are going to be just pointers to things in the cloud. But those are the three domains, and we're looking at it from a service point of view, which is the service owner in the center. The last thing I want to point out here is that the consumer is really the key. The left and the right, there are consumers that are highlighted. On the left, you'll see technology consumer, and technology consumer is who consumes the operational bits, if you will. I call them building blocks a lot of times, but it's really the stuff that goes across many different devices, like a networking or server infrastructure, stuff like that. And on the right-hand side, you'll see the business consumer, and then the business consumer is who's actually getting the business value from consuming services. So with that, I just wanted to wrap up my part, but this is CSDM in a nutshell. You're going to get some more details from the rest of the Contender team here.
Excellent. Appreciate that, Mark. So Chris Costantino, I'm our VP of Business Strategy and Partner Alliances. I've been in the ecosystem for 7 years now, a lot of different types of roles, but joined Contender, been with Contender for about 3 years. Michelle, if you go to that next slide. I'm just going to take a minute for some of you that there's plenty of our clients that are on the call here today, but for some of you that are not aware of who we are, I just want to kind of take a quick second before we introduce you to the team to introduce you to Contender as a whole. So what we are, Contender Solutions, we're based in Tampa, Florida. We have a national presence. We have been founded in 2012. We've got over 500 plus ServiceNow implementations under our belt that range from very large global enterprises down to smaller accounts that are in the small to mid-sized business market. From a certification standpoint, we have over 80 resources that are actually certified. We have over 100 plus certified resources altogether when you include our delivery team, as well as our pre-sales team, as well as our advisory services business unit. So lots of folks, lots of great capabilities there. We are an elite partner. And what elite means for some of you that are not aware, it's not just our ability to have the right resources. It's our ability to hit the CSAT scores that you see there at a 9.8 on a consistent basis. It's our ability to have depth across the platform. It's our ability to sell products with. We're really proud with that. Go ahead, Michelle. Next slide. Awesome. From a capabilities perspective, the way that we work with organizations, we have a holistic approach to the way that we work with customers. Essentially, what we have is what we call Activate, which is our framework. This is an engagement model that we work with customers where we help them up front within our pre-sale cycles. We have folks like Scott Freitas, who's actually on the line today, who have that program experience, the solution background, helping build solutions up front before we sit down and have to get into the billable activities. We're building solutions and helping you understand what the value of those solutions are up front, coming to common agreements on what we could do and how it's going to shape your transformation, and then moving that into what we do in delivery, which is further assessment through architecting solutions. What you find is most partners really focus primarily on architecting solution and constructing the technology, and then very little on that transition and adoption and the maintaining the value piece of it, or even establishing business value and growing that so that your executives who are sponsoring these engagements are really in the know of exactly what are we trying to accomplish, how does this fit into my overarching initiatives, and then that model at the end of that engagement to play it back to them to say, hey, here's the value that your organization and those folks that brought us into your organization have really promoted within your organization. And then now here's kind of what we're looking for as that secondary capability for you to really help drive further transformation, further growth, and so on and so forth. So that's our Activate model that we follow very, very tightly. Next slide. And then from a list of services, the way that we break it out, and I wanted to kind of show you this, is we do follow ServiceNow very specifically. We have an organization that solely focuses on IT workflows. We have another area of the organization and business unit that solely focuses on employee workflows. And then we also have another area of the business that solely focuses on the customer workflows. And then from there, we also have capabilities that really make up our depth, which is really custom application development into our advisory services, which consumes your adoption capabilities, your process consulting, and so on and so forth. So on the next slide, Michelle, we'll actually showcase what we're really talking about today is the capabilities that Contender brings to the table for CSDM specifically, really focus on IT workflows and our advisory capabilities around education services, business transformation and adoption, as well as the process consulting that we deliver. Within this, we're also going to talk about in the last second of the presentation, managed services, and how do we help organizations make CMDB even more effective, even easier by giving you consistency in managed services from Contender as a partner. Next slide. All right. And then Jeff, if you could, I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Hey everyone, this is Jeff Henkel from Contender. I'm the ITOM practice lead for Contender Solutions. Like Chris, I've been in the ecosystem, I guess between 7 and 8 years. I started back on Berlin. I think that puts us in the 2012 timeframe or so. I've been focused primarily on ITOM for about the last 5 years, although I have worked a little bit across the rest of the platform in ITSM, ITBM, a little bit of HR and so on. So pretty broad spread of experience there. Next slide, please. Thank you, Michelle. So what we're going to talk about next is some common sense or practical guidance for how you might get started heading down the road of making your CMDB service aware. So first, we want to talk a little bit about what that means. In order to understand what a service-aware CMDB is, we need to first start by coming up with a common definition for a CMDB. The old traditional inventory-driven CMDB. Exactly what is that and what can it do for you? In the simplest terms, if you have an accurate, successfully managed CMDB, it makes it easy for you to understand your IT estate. In other words, what IT assets you're responsible for managing, maintaining, and supporting. You know what you have, and you know the important information about what you have. When we talk about making that CMDB service aware, what we do is we add the ability for you to not only understand what you have, but also a little bit about how it's being used in order to deliver your services to your customers. That's really what's the next critical piece. Once you understand what you've got and you're able to manage it, we really want to move into that understanding about how it's being used. And we'll see in a few minutes how we might get in that direction and some of the additional value we might be able to get once we start making our way down that path. Next slide, please. So I want to thank Mark for introducing us to the Common Service Data Model. This was a very exciting release from ServiceNow back when they came out with the very first one. I guess it's been about 18 months now since the first one came out. There's a lot of talk in the community, both the partner and the customer community, about Common Service Data Model. It's a fantastic document from ServiceNow. There's a lot of information floating around the community site. There were many tracks at Knowledge dealing with it. One of the things that Contender has become known for is our ability to help customers understand the Common Service Data Model from a practical, common sense perspective, and how to get started down the road of becoming compliant with it. So let's boil all that down to just a very quick plain English description of what CSDM is. We ignore the terminology, we ignore the diagrams and the tables and the charts and graphs in that white paper. We can really boil it down to two things. It's first and foremost a blueprint for adding service awareness to your CMDB. And secondly, it's a guidebook for taking that service awareness and leveraging it within the rest of your IT processes in order to add value. And that's the key phrase there. We're doing this because we expect to get value from our efforts. And the CSDM gives us some guidance on how we might be able to leverage all of this work to become service aware to get that value out of our processes elsewhere on the platform. So the common services and data model, Mark defined those for us in fairly technical terms. Again, boiling these down to plain English, we can say that common services is a set of standardized terms and definitions that are shared across the entire ServiceNow platform. Those terms and definitions are no longer specific to any one particular area on the platform. And secondly, it's a data model, which means that those standardized terms and definitions can be implemented on the platform using standard sets of tables, fields, and relationships the same way, regardless of where they're used across the platform. Next slide, please. Okay, so we step into the CSDM in stages. It's a very large white paper. It covers many aspects of service management and other things the platform can do. There are 5 distinct stages that we talk about in terms of CSDM implementation or migration. Starting on the left side with creep. We won't find creep defined in any of the CSDM terminology from ServiceNow. And that's because in creep mode, this is kind of before CSDM. This is pre-work that needs to be done in order to begin becoming service aware. In creep mode, we have a standard non-service aware CMDB with which we can manage our IT inventory. We understand the assets in our IT estate, and we can manage them through the use of that database. In crawl mode, which is the first formal stage of the CSDM, we begin to be able to manage our applications because we've now become service aware enough to understand how our IT assets are being used in order to deliver and support those applications. And then we have further stages such as walk, run, and fly, which give us additional capabilities and additional value across other areas of the ServiceNow platform. We'll get into the walk, run, and fly in future sessions. For the rest of today's discussion, we're going to focus on those first 2 stages, which is creep and crawl. Next slide, please. Okay, so creep and crawl, the topic for the rest of our practical conversation today. Once we've established a firm footing in the creep and crawl stages of CSDM, we can do things like ensure that we have an accurate inventory of IT assets. We know what we have, and we know enough about what we have to be useful and give us the value that we need. We also have a base level of service mapping at this point tied to our managed applications. For those applications we've chosen to manage, we have confident knowledge of which items in our IT estate are necessary in order to support and drive those applications to our consumers or even our end customers. We also have a solid foundation for realizing value even at this early stage, and also for growing into those other stages of CSDM if and when the time comes that they're necessary for us. These are not stages that can be skipped or jumped over. Creep and crawl are the mandatory cost of entry for doing anything at all with the service-aware CMDB, and anything beyond this point with CSDM. We must start here, and we must have a solid foundation. Okay, next slide, please. So we're going to talk momentarily about how we might get started with creep mode, some of the value we might gain from getting there, and then some of the use cases that might help us achieve that value. Then we're going to do a similar conversation for crawl. But before we do that, I want to review some guiding principles that we like to apply to CMDB projects, to CSDM migration projects. And generally, these principles can be applied to any of the projects, especially on the ServiceNow platform. Starting with standardize. ServiceNow has spent a great deal of time and effort giving us the CSDM with a set of standard terms, definitions, and data models. We want to stay and work within that model. We don't want to modify the model. We don't want to make exceptions to it. And where we have work that was done prior to CSDM, we want to think about migrating that work into the standard model, including moving data if necessary. We want to focus on value. If we're going to do anything at all, that means that we're going to spend time, effort, energy, and money getting work done. We want to know why we're getting that work done. What do we expect to achieve? What value do we expect to get from the end result? And we want to let that value drive every decision that we make along the way to ensure that we're in a position to realize that value in the end. We also want you to start where you are. This means making an honest assessment of your current state. You want to confidently know where you're beginning. What is the state of your CMDB? Are you comfortable with its completeness and correctness? Is it getting the job done today? Are there significant gaps that you're aware of? A realistic and honest assessment of where you are is critical to putting a plan together to get you where you need to be. We also want you to think and work holistically. Yeah, I see somebody just commented, nice alignment to ITIL 4. You're absolutely right. Half of these come straight from ITIL. Excellent ideas out of the ITIL folks. And some of these are slight modifications of those. So getting back to that, thinking and working holistically, we don't want to suboptimize processes in order to make one small portion of your IT service work efficient or effective. Involve all of your stakeholders at every step of the way. And that means processes that are maybe ancillary to what you're trying to improve in order to make sure everyone's voice is heard and everyone's efficiency is considered. No suboptimization. We want to keep things simple and practical, which means that we might have some fantastic ideas about how to best leverage CSDM. We might have some great thoughts on how we can do many wonderful things on the platform, but it doesn't do any good to spend time and money building something if you can't manage it once it's in production, and if you don't have the capacity for the organizational change in order to put it into effective use. So keep things simple and practical. Only build what you can actually use and get value from. And lastly, you want to understand the long game. Know where you're headed with the ServiceNow platform in the next 12 to 24 months. Know what your roadmap is. Know where your IT organization is headed if you're undergoing organizational change internally. Know where that long game is headed and ensure that the decisions you're making in the short term are compatible with your long-term direction. You don't want to do something that works great today and then have to rework a bunch of it in a year because someone is headed in a different direction. So with these guiding principles, we can step into making a CSDM solid and then moving it into a service-aware mode with the walk phase. Next slide, please. So creep. What does creep mean? It gives us the ability to manage inventory. Again, this is your traditional non-service-aware CMDB. When you're successfully standing at creep mode in terms of CSDM, it means that you have a CMDB that is complete enough to meet your needs, and it's correct enough to meet your needs, and it's being managed to ensure ongoing completeness and correctness. No CMDB is 100% complete 100% of the time. There's simply not enough value to be had in doing so. But you've got value expectations from a CMDB, even just an inventory-based CMDB. So understanding what that value expectation is will help you recognize how complete it needs to be and how correct it needs to be in order to give you the expected value. And that, coupled with management processes such as solid configuration and change management, will help you ensure that you're complete and correct enough on an ongoing basis. This, implemented and managed successfully, gives you a solid footing in the creep phase. Next slide, please. So what kind of value can we get from creep? We may decide that we expect to do things like increase our incident time to resolution. We might be able to put a use case together driven by an inventory type CMDB and associating incidents with our configuration items in order to streamline assignments. A faster, proper assignment to an escalated incident can lead to a reduced incident time to resolution. You might have a value expectation of reducing the number of unsuccessful changes, and you may be able to accomplish that by associating your change requests with configuration items. That helps you identify collisions and also helps you ensure that change requests are falling within maintenance windows, minimizing the chance of an unsuccessful change due to an unexpected side effect. You may also have a value expectation around software costs. A good solid inventory-based CMDB can help with that by letting you understand what software is installed and running where. This provides a solid foundation for getting the software asset management down the road, where you can compare what's installed and running with what you've purchased in order to know where your license compliance is. Next slide, please. So how do we get there? If we have a value statement or two that is tied to creep mode, these are some things that we can do to start heading in that direction. First and foremost, and this gets back to focusing on value, know why you need to get there. We can all probably agree that a solid configuration management database is a good idea, but something being a good idea is not a great reason to spend limited amounts of time and money that we all have. We need to understand why we're headed that way. What value specifically do we expect to get from a project that moves us to creep mode? Once we understand why we need to go somewhere, then we can begin to define the use cases that support our expected value. If we need to reduce incident response times and resolution times, then perhaps our use case is based around incident assignment, driven by configuration items, for example. When we know the use cases that we need to support in order to drive our expected value, then we can begin to define the data requirements needed in order to support those use cases. Recall that we talked about a CMDB being successful if it's complete enough and correct enough. Well, what does complete enough and correct enough mean? It means that it has the information to drive your use cases that will drive the value that you're expecting to get. Once you know your data requirements, then you can define your processes that are necessary to manage that data. Complete and correct on day one is quickly incomplete and incorrect on day two, with no processes around which the CMDB can be managed to ensure that it stays complete and correct. Once we understand what processes are necessary in order to manage the data, then we can configure and populate the CMDB. This is where Chris talked about a lot of partners wanting to jump straight to design and configure the solution. Well, that's a small part of the slide in terms of how to get to creep. We need to understand all of these other bullets before we go hands on keyboard and start configuring things and start pumping data into that fancy new database. Lastly, we want to put our process into use. The process is as important as the technical structure of the CMDB database itself, because it's the process which ensures ongoing value can be achieved. Okay, next slide, please. So when we're standing solidly on creep and we have a solid inventory-based CMDB, our next step along the service-aware CMDB journey is into crawl mode. With crawl mode, as defined by the CSDM, we begin to understand how the items in our IT estate are used. Crawl mode builds upon the inventory-based CMDB by including logical and physical relationships between software, hardware, network configuration items, other components that are maybe stored in the CMDB. It also includes self-maintaining service maps so that we can associate those configuration items with the applications and services that they support. These two additions to our creep mode traditional CMDB allow us to begin managing the applications that we're supporting as opposed to managing the individual IT assets in our inventory. Next slide, please. So some value possibilities that we can achieve in the crawl state. Perhaps we have a value expectation to improve stakeholder communication through ITSM. We may be able to achieve that by better understanding the impact of incidents and problems on our services and applications. If we know with confidence that an incident or a problem associated with a particular server is impacting our 4 most critical business applications, then we can use that to improve communication with those business users, application users, or maybe even the sponsors or owners. Perhaps our value expectation is to decrease incident time to resolution. We may be able to do that by identifying the underlying or potentially causal configuration items on an incident, given the configuration item that the incident pertains to. That may more quickly allow the incident to be assigned to the proper group, and root cause analysis may be sped given a list of potentially causal configuration items right on the incident itself. Perhaps we have a value expectation based on reducing unplanned outages. We may be able to achieve that by reliably identifying the impacted services and applications on a change request and recognizing whether the applications and services that may experience an outage given a particular change request should be approved or perhaps rescheduled or rejected. We may have a value position based on reducing the change lead time. And we may be able to do that, again, by relying on the impacted services and applications to possibly streamline approvals or notifications or maybe even CAB assignments. These are just some typical examples we've seen for folks that can begin to get value from a service-aware CMDB, even just at the crawl stage, very early stage of CSDM adoption. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do we get there? This slide looks very similar to the creep. How do we get there? First and foremost, again, know why you need to get there. Recognize the value that you expect to get from the work that you're doing and build your project around that. Once we know the value we expect to get, just like in creep mode, we define the use cases that can drive that value. That helps us define the service awareness needs within our CMDB. Becoming service aware in the CMDB is really the establishment of a program, often an extension of configuration management within IT. It can be a long and time-consuming effort to fully service aware your CMDB. Many services, many possibly hundreds of business applications in your IT estate, they need to be mapped one way or another at some point or another. Understanding the value you want to get out of the effort will help you identify what to do first. Perhaps you have some applications that are most critical to your revenue stream, and they should be the first ones targeted. Perhaps you have some applications or some services that have been particularly problematic in regard to change management or incident response. Perhaps those should be the ones first. Understanding the value you expect to get will help you define the requirements for the early stages of your service awareness project or program. Once you've got that data defined, again, it's identifying the processes to manage that. This is often an extension of your configuration management process in order to include the new information or data that is necessary to provide the service awareness. Once we understand all of that, then we can configure and populate those business applications and the service maps that give us that initial set of service awareness. And putting that into use involves extending your configuration management process to include service awareness. This presents new requirements, perhaps, to change management or configuration management, such as the acquisition of a new business application. There may be a component to configuration management with crawl where maybe there was none in creep. Okay, that concludes my portion of the discussion. Thanks for your ear, everyone, this afternoon. And with that, we'll turn it over to Scott.
Thanks, Jeff. I just want to just add a couple components here to the conversation track too. I know we want to jump into Scott's, but as you can tell, the reason for the topic, and the subject title, if it's not a CMDB, I think you can start to see why we look at this as more of a program than really CMDB, and not in a program that it has to be this, not the thing that everybody's aspiring to do and to be, and has to be this larger, huge project. But it needs to be encompassing. It needs to encompass relationships to the business, the relationships and outputs and value to different groups. And you can see that it starts with, obviously managing that estate, right, and managing that inventory, to really being an empowering and enabling tool for the organization to leverage as you start to need to look at things and gather data and relate data together for values that go into your product leaders needing to understand what impacts could impact their product that are live and out there. What's the total cost of my product? How can I help manage and shape the costs of my products by vendor, by supporting capabilities, by what we're taking to the business? Does the cost outweigh the revenue capabilities that are needs for the business, to really just managing IT as a business model? So, the way that we try to approach, this with our customers is truly focusing on getting that first established fundamental capability down, which is kind of what Jeff has just been talking through, to then being able to move. Because the better we have that foundation, the faster that we can move and achieve the other areas of success. Because the other areas of success is just more about how inclusive can we be in the organization. So with that, Scott, I'll let you jump right in. A lot of the things that we build upon are value and value stories. We have a whole value realization team that Scott leads, and he'll kind of give you a little bit of background of what he's doing and how we're trying to provide true quantitative and qualitative values to our customers to be able to build their programs. Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Jeff, and thanks, Mark, as well. Thank you, everybody else, for staying with us here. 43 minutes into this, going strong. So, Scott Freitas, I'm our VP of Value Realization. Give you a little background on my experience. I was introduced to the ServiceNow platform in 2012. I had most recently, in my 12-year career at a Fortune 500 financial services firm, most recently prior to that, I basically was responsible for the IT service desk, the IT help desk, and we were looking to transform the way we provided service. And I got introduced to ServiceNow at that time. And began to learn a little bit about, what ServiceNow could do. And then I spent the next 5 or so years there implementing ServiceNow to replace a well-entrenched legacy service management system through many lines of business in the company. And really, that foundational CMDB provided a lot of value. So what I hope to cover here in the next couple slides is a couple use cases, right? So everything Mark and Jeff talked about sounds great. It's all the reasons why you need to do this. But for me as a customer, when I was going through a lot of this, it was, hey, give me a couple real world examples of where people actually showed the value. So that's what I kind of want to jump into. I want to give you a couple examples of where organizations use this as a very valuable tool. And it kind of goes with that theme of it's not just the CMDB. This is a valuable tool. It's not just another IT database. It's a business value tool that helps you drive that through the organization. So with that, we'll kind of jump into the first customer story here. So this is a broadcast company. And really, if you look at, Jeff kind of talked about this when he was talking a little bit, during the creep and the crawl phase of the CSDM. So this is a broadcast company who was moving from a legacy service management system to ServiceNow. And one of their business challenges that they expressed was, while they're doing live broadcasts, they were having challenges because they would have equipment which would fail during a live broadcast, and it was required equipment for the broadcast. But in their old system, when it would hit a queue, it would just hit a queue like any other ticket, and it would get resolved just like everybody else does it, right? FIFO, first in, first out. So by the time it got around to getting worked, they were already off the air, and it really wasn't as much of an issue. So what was created here was created some attributes on their CIs and asset records so that they could have an inventory of what equipment on a given Saturday or Sunday afternoon while they were broadcasting. They could show exactly what equipment was in use and have a very easy way for the people on site at those events to open up a record producer and say, hey, we need to open up a ticket because a boom mic in this part of the stadium or this part of the broadcast arena, this part of the building is having an issue. We need to get it resolved. And then there were triggers on those incidents to make those hit the very top of the queue to get a very short SLA to send notifications to the on-site support team to say, hey, this is an actual something that needs fixed right now because this is a piece of equipment which is important to a live broadcast. This isn't something that you can just get to when you get to it. So the outcome of that was exactly what you would hope it would be. Their support team earned a lot more confidence with the actual broadcast teams, with the business side of the organization who are doing the broadcasts at the live events, because they were able to show that immediate response and resolve those types of issues right away. So when Jeff talked through it, he talked about, making sure that you tag, CIs to incidents. But if you look at it from a different perspective, from the business perspective, to be able to have more confidence that you can run through an entire broadcast, and if you do have an issue, it's going to get resolved right away, going to get remediated, of just a tremendous amount of business value, almost immeasurable business value, to have that type of responsiveness to that kind of event. We'll jump to our next one.
Yeah, Scott, before you jump to that next slide, one thing I want to share with that story too, it's quite interesting, right? So that's a huge value. Right? That's a phase one value. What that customer is able to see too is, with Scott's team and what Scott's been able to do is be able to translate that message for them. So now we've got this implementation of that phase one. It's producing confidence in the organization. It's reducing cost of the service overall. We're able to translate that with some great benchmark data. Now we've got a baseline for them. And now we can start showing that back to the executives that originally funded this project for this service management leadership team, to be able to show that back to say, look, this is phase one. This is why you invested in this strategy. Here's the quantitative values that we're looking for and that we have achieved. Here's now how we can move that with this next phase, which what they have in mind now is further enrichment, right? They want to enrich that CMDB further. They want to bring it in at different service levels. They want to be able to advance their CMDB, but they're taking a business focus to say, here's the business problems that we can knock out if you guys continue to fund this program. That's really where a lot of this value comes in, what Scott's team's doing in that story.
Yeah, absolutely. And that first example is an early CSDM maturity, right? So that's not even service aware yet. That's infrastructure aware. That's having the CIs, having the items discovered, and having a pretty confident CMDB there from an infrastructure aware perspective. This next example kind of goes to that next level of maturity within the CSDM, and you're getting into service awareness, application awareness with this next story. So this next story is a large finance company dealing with huge market volatility due to the geopolitical environments. And this is a pre-COVID thing. This isn't something that happened during COVID. This was before that. Just the nature of the last 18 months prior to COVID or so. This organization was getting a lot of sensitivity to any perceived impacts that IT might have to the business applications or business services. So they already had that service awareness there. They already had applications mapped, infrastructure mapped to them. They already had those things in place, and they actually already had an attribute that let them know which ones of those applications or systems were broker facing or advisor facing. So they could at any point have a trigger based off of that. So that's exactly what was put in place. Essentially, a flag was put in place in the CMDB, and they really wanted higher scrutiny around any changes to those systems, to anything that would roll up into those systems that would affect the broker-facing application. Because as a client, if the market's swinging significantly and you're looking at your retirement account get crushed and you want to get through to your advisor, you want high confidence that he can look up your account on the spot and help guide you for what you should do or shouldn't do. So they initiated this process, helped them set up a flag so that they basically instituted an everyday change advisory board meeting where at 4 p.m. every day, the entire leadership team would scrutinize any change that was scheduled for that evening that could roll up and impact one of those broker facing services. So essentially, it became one of those situations where anything that you had that was going to affect those, you were going to push it off to Saturday because it was going to get so much scrutiny by that change advisory board because they wanted that market or that system stability to be there. So the outcome of that was, minimal outages. So they didn't have to deal with a lot of perceived bad outages, IP caused impacts and things like that to those advisor facing applications. So, and again, like Chris said, a whole lot of value here. So they had messages from the C-level executives about making sure that IT availability, system availability was at its highest during those most vulnerable times. And they were able to do that. They were able to check that box, show that value back, and just continue to grow their program.
Yeah, and this,
so there's
this
an
group,
example on the service side.
Scott, like question for you on this group too, right? I think what we've seen with them is a massive amount of additional funding going to this team now from a platform perspective to continue mapping efforts, and it was really starting to be driven by DevOps, right? With the product leaders and DevOps driving that, saying, "Look, we want more visibility. We want to be able to see this. We want to ensure availability continues at mass levels." So again, enhancing the program through these stories and providing the business justification and as we go. And I know a lot of you on this call, I deal with a lot of you personally at senior leadership levels. When you start talking about your strong DevOps organizations, or your product level or digital organizations, this is a way that we really start solidifying IT to be able to then enable what those other product teams need so that revenue and all the targets of revenue are being captured, and we create that availability and scalability within your orgs. So great story, Scott.
Perfect. I know we got about 7 minutes left. Go ahead, Chris, and then we'll jump to questions.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if we could drop to that next slide, Michelle, would be great. Next 2 slides, actually. You can just skip ahead. So again, guys, before we go into the slide itself, I will remind everybody that our goal today was really to set the foundation. Hopefully, we've done that. We're going to take the next tracks that we take. We're going to have more continued technical talk track with Jeff. We'll get more details into Service Graph as more details come out from Mark and the product team there. But with Jeff, we're really going to dive into those next phases, right? And get a little bit more specific, right? We didn't get into table structures and stuff like that on purpose, but we're going to take more of a technical deep dive. And then with Scott and myself, we're going to continue the talk track around program justifications and being able to establish programs in your organizations. So we're not talking about CMDBs. We're talking about establishing an enablement system for your organization to build upon, which hopefully would provide you further funding and deeper funding. So those are our goals. And as we go into our next sessions, the one thing I did want to mention, Contender Solutions has built out. If you liked what you've seen here today and what you've heard, and you've still trying to figure out, well, still a lot of hassles just in the aspect of managing, the CMDB. We have a configuration management as a service. We offer it to customers right now. We've got a Lighthouse customer program that's been happening over the last year. That program is evolving, and now we've got this built-out capability for organizations to be able to allow us to come in, really help them with the 5 major critical factors in deploying CMDB, which is operating costs, visibility, and accuracy in reporting, the data integrity, the reconciliations, and then consistent subject matter expertise. So we provide that as a managed service. Michelle, if you go to that next slide. So we utilize our skill sets both at an advisory level. So folks that sit in my organization and the Scott world, as well as folks that kind of, are embodied within Jeff Hinkle's organization as the chief architect of his org from an ITOM perspective. He's grooming and has folks in his organization that are high level consultants that really understand helping you build and achieve your program goals. So with that, we'll open up to live Q&As if there's anything that's out there. Otherwise, I'll read through this list. I didn't see any crazy questions out there, but we'll open it up for questions. No questions?
Well, what I could do is maybe just fill in a little bit of what we're working on next. So those folks that have kind of hung out this far, some of the things we're doing on CSDM next is to dealing with microservices. This is a very hot topic from an operational as also architecture point of view, is understanding, what microservices are out there and how you break down these monoliths into microservices architectures. We're also looking at life cycles, adding process. There's a lot of products coming out that are going to start using process now. To be able to do from an audit perspective, as well as for GRC and business continuity planning. So that's going to be added to CSDM. And there's a lot of other, I would say, housekeeping things that are happening on the internals, like consolidating our lifecycle management approach across all the CIs and different types. As you know, processes aren't discoverable necessarily. So we're consolidating how we manage life cycles across everything to be common.
Awesome, Mark. We really appreciate that. And again, we have this recorded session, so we'll probably get the recording out and some of the content here out as well. If there's any questions that anybody has, please feel free to reach out to us directly. Contender Solutions is a strategic partner here to support the organization. We continue to work with ServiceNow in partnership around CSDM and Service Graph, and really working as an enablement partner to ensure that you as a customer is ready and prepared to be able to talk to it within your organizations and prepared to deploy it within your organization. So again, if there's no questions, we really appreciate the time. For those of you that are not customers of Contender today, we hope to really achieve a great partnership level with you guys in the future. For our customers that are on the line today, thanks for joining us. Really looking forward to having some more further value-based conversations around continuing to build out your CMDBs and getting you to a fly state. So again, appreciate everybody's time. Thank you to the speakers as well.